The story of World War II submarines doesn't begin with steel hulls or torpedoes cutting through the ocean. It begins with a simple idea: strike without being seen. And by the time the war erupted in 1939, that idea had evolved into one of the most feared weapons on Earth. Submarines weren't just ships. They were hunters, silent, patient, and deadly. And no nation embraced that philosophy more aggressively than Germany. Germany's silent hunters, the U-boat force. When war broke out, Germany didn't have a massive navy compared to Britain. Instead, it leaned into something far more disruptive: submarines. The strategy was simple but devastating: choke supply lines and starve Britain into submission. At the center of this strategy was a submarine that would become legendary. Type 7 U-boat, the backbone of the Atlantic War. If World War II had a main character submarine, this would be it. The Type 7 wasn't the biggest submarine in the war. It wasn't the fastest either, but it was everywhere. Between 1935 and 1945, over 700 of these submarines were built, making it the most produced submarine class in history. That number alone tells a story. Germany didn't just rely on this design, it mass-produced it because it worked. The Type 7 traced its roots back to World War I designs, gradually refined through interwar experimentation. By the time it entered full production, it had become a balanced machine built for one purpose: destroy convoys. At around 220 feet long and displacing roughly 769 tons on the surface, it was compact enough to maneuver, but large enough to carry serious firepower. 5 torpedo tubes, 4 at the front and 1 at the rear, gave it flexibility in attack. 14 torpedoes could be carried in total, meaning a skilled crew could strike multiple targets in a single patrol. Early in the war, a deck gun sat proudly on top. It allowed submarines to surface and finish off damaged ships without wasting torpedoes. But that didn't last long. As Allied air power grew stronger, surfacing became a death sentence. By 1942, most of those deck guns were removed. The ocean had become too dangerous above the surface. On paper, the Type 7 could reach about 17 knots while surfaced and around 7.5 knots underwater. But speed wasn't the point. Stealth was. Diving depths officially sat around 300 feet, though in desperate moments crews pushed far beyond that, sometimes reaching depths close to 650 feet just to survive depth charge attacks. Inside, conditions were brutal. 44 men packed into a steel tube, surrounded by machinery, fuel, and weapons. Air grew stale quickly. Humidity clung to everything. Food spoiled. Sleep was inconsistent. And yet these crews operated for weeks at a time in the open Atlantic. This wasn't just warfare, it was endurance. The real power of the Type 7 wasn't just the submarine itself, it was how it was used. German Admiral Karl Donitz developed what became known as Wolfpack tactics. Instead of attacking alone, multiple submarines coordinated their strikes, overwhelming convoy defenses. At the start of the war, Germany had only a handful of these submarines ready, but production ramped up rapidly. Variants like the Type 7C improved structural strength and added better anti-aircraft defenses. Later versions pushed diving limits even further, and the results were immediate. Early successes shocked the Allies. A single submarine, U-47, managed to slip into a heavily defended British harbor and sink the battleship HMS Royal Oak. Another submarine sank an aircraft carrier. These weren't just tactical victories. They were psychological blows. For a time, it seemed like nothing could stop the U-boats. But the war wouldn't stay in Germany's favor forever. By 1943, advancements in radar, sonar, and air patrols turned the tide. The same submarines that once dominated the Atlantic were now being hunted. Production of the Type 7 eventually stopped as newer, more advanced designs began to emerge. Most surviving boats were scuttled at the end of the war, their crews ordered to sink them rather than surrender. Only a single example remains today, preserved as a reminder of just how influential this submarine truly was. Type 9 U-boat, the long-range predator. If the Type 7 was the workhorse, the Type 9 was the hunter that went further. Much further. Introduced just before the war, the Type 9 was designed for long-range missions, places the Type 7 simply couldn't reach. This meant the American coastline, the Caribbean, and even the Indian Ocean. At over 250 feet long and significantly heavier than the Type 7, the Type 9 carried more fuel, more torpedoes, and more potential destruction. 6 torpedo tubes allowed it to fire from multiple angles, and with a total of 22 torpedoes on board, it could sustain longer patrols without needing to return to base. Speed was slightly higher on the surface, pushing past 18 knots, while submerged speeds remained similar to its smaller counterpart, a shift in the war beneath the waves. By the midpoint of the war, something had changed. Submarines were no longer invisible predators. Aircraft equipped with radar could spot them even at night. Escort ships carried improved sonar. Convoys became tighter, more organized, and heavily defended. The Atlantic, once a playground for U-boats, turned into a battlefield where survival was no longer guaranteed. Germany's early dominance began to fade. But while Germany struggled to maintain control beneath the waves, another nation was just getting started, and it approached submarine warfare very differently. The United States enters the fight underwater. When the United States entered World War II, its submarine force wasn't just prepared, it was about to become one of the most effective naval tools of the entire conflict. But instead of focusing on the Atlantic, American submarines turned their attention to the Pacific, a completely different battlefield. Vast distances, scattered islands, long supply routes, and that's exactly where submarines thrived. Gato-class submarine, America's early war workhorse. The Gato-class submarines marked the beginning of America's large-scale submarine operations during the war. These weren't small coastal vessels. They were long-range fleet submarines, built to operate far from home for extended periods. At about 310 feet in length and displacing over 1,500 tons on the surface, they were significantly larger than most German submarines. And with size came capability. 10 torpedo tubes and a payload of 24 torpedoes meant these submarines could deliver devastating attacks. Speed reached over 20 knots on the surface, allowing them to keep up with fleets or reposition quickly. But what really made them effective wasn't just firepower, it was endurance. With a range of around 11,000 nautical miles, Gato-class submarines could patrol deep into enemy territory and stay there for weeks, sometimes over 2 months. Inside, conditions were far better than their German counterparts. Air conditioning reduced humidity. Food storage systems allowed for longer missions. Every crew member had a proper bunk. These might sound like small details, but they made a huge difference. A well-rested crew performs better. Equipment lasts longer. Missions succeed more often. And succeed they did. Gato-class submarines played a major role in crippling Japan's merchant fleet. Oil, supplies, and reinforcements were all targets. Over time, these submarines didn't just disrupt Japan's logistics. They dismantled them. Some of the most successful American submarines of the war came from this class, achieving massive tonnage sunk through aggressive patrols. But success didn't come without cost. A significant portion of American submarine losses during the war came from this very class. They were effective, but they were also constantly in danger. Balao-class submarine, built to go deeper and last longer. As the war progressed, American submarine designers started noticing something important. Depth mattered. The deeper a submarine could go, the better its chances of surviving enemy counterattacks. Depth charges were deadly, but they had limits. So the solution was simple in theory: build submarines that could go beyond those limits. That's exactly what the Balao class was designed to do. At first glance, these submarines looked very similar to the earlier Gato class. Same general size, same mission profile, same heavy torpedo armament. But beneath the surface, literally everything had changed. The pressure hull was reinforced using stronger steel, allowing these submarines to dive deeper than before. Test depths increased from around 300 feet to roughly 400 feet. Tench-class submarine, the final evolution of diesel warfare. By the later stages of World War II, submarine design had reached a point of refinement. Lessons had been learned, weaknesses had been addressed, and what emerged was the Tench-class. If the Gato class was the foundation and the Balao class was the improvement, the Tench-class was the polished, final version. At roughly the same size and with similar displacement, the Tench-class didn't radically change the formula. Instead, it perfected it. 10 torpedo tubes, 24 torpedoes, strong engines producing over 5,000 horsepower. surface speeds just above 20 knots, submerged speeds close to 9 knots. The Royal Navy beneath the waves. While Germany focused on disrupting trade and the United States targeted Pacific supply lines, Britain had its own submarine strategy. Operating in the Mediterranean, the North Sea, and the Far East, British submarines faced a wide range of challenges, and they relied on two main types to get the job done. T-class submarine, Britain's ocean patrol specialist. The T-class submarines were built for endurance. They weren't as numerous as German U-boats or American fleet submarines, but they played a critical role in key theaters of the war. At around 275 feet long and displacing roughly 1,300 tons on the surface, these submarines struck a balance between size and capability. Their armament was impressive, up to 10 torpedo tubes internally, with some early designs, even including external tubes, allowed for powerful attacks against enemy ships. A deck gun added surface firepower, though like other navies, its usefulness declined as air threats increased. Speed wasn't exceptional, just over 15 knots on the surface and about 9 knots underwater. But once again, speed wasn't the defining factor. Range was. With the ability to travel around 11,000 nautical miles, T-class submarines could operate across vast areas, from the Mediterranean to the Pacific. Inside, conditions were manageable but still challenging. Crews faced long patrols, heat, and limited space, especially in tropical regions. But these submarines proved effective. In the Mediterranean, they targeted Axis shipping routes, disrupting supply lines between Europe and North Africa. Despite strong enemy defenses, they achieved notable successes. Some submarines gained reputations for aggressive tactics and bold missions. Over time, improvements were made. Better fire control systems, improved anti-aircraft defenses, and refinements based on combat experience. The T-class wasn't flashy, it was reliable. And in war, reliability wins. U-class submarine, small, cheap, and surprisingly deadly. The U-class submarine represented the smaller, simpler side of wartime design, originally built for training rather than combat. As the war progressed, these submarines proved far more capable than expected. Measuring around 175 to 200 feet long and displacing about 630 tons, they were compact, agile, and equipped with 6 torpedo tubes and a small deck gun. Their speed and range were limited, making them ideal for operations close to base, especially in the Mediterranean. In these confined waters, their size became an advantage, allowing them to maneuver easily and launch surprise attacks. Although conditions on board were cramped for crews of about 30, and early designs had flaws, the U-class still achieved impressive success. Proving effectiveness matters more than size. World War II submarines weren't just machines. They were the result of necessity, innovation, and adaptation under pressure. From the mass-produced German Type 7 to the Dow-ranging Type 9, from the reliable American Gato and advanced Balau to the refined Tench, and from Britain's dependable T-class to the underestimated U-class, each played a role in redefining naval warfare. Some were built for speed, some for endurance, some for stealth, but all of them changed the way wars were fought at sea. And even today, modern submarines still carry echoes of these designs. Because once the world discovered the power of striking from beneath the waves, there was no going back. If this deep dive into World War II submarines was interesting, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment about which submarine stood out the most. More detailed breakdowns and war stories are coming next.